Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. So to follow up the AK video, I figured I'd do a AR video, and obviously you guys can see a change there. There's Scrabble letters with the family name on it to include my son that's on the way. So here it is, right? I get a lot of questions about starting to build an AR and that kind of thing. Should I build or buy or whatever, right? So what this is more than anything else is it's sort of a buyer's guide for the most part. What to look for and all of that. There will be at least one link in the description below to go more into details about different subjects that are brought up, mostly because I've already done it, and it plugs you into another video source if you want to go in depth on a lot of different things. I'll touch on those really quickly, but then I'll let you know which videos to go check out a link in the description for later. So, first thing to consider, and I have my little notes on my laptop here, what is this thing for? Like, what is the AR for? Is it strictly for home defense? Right? And if that's the case, we might want to build up an AR pistol by using a pistol lower or whatever, to where the lower itself doesn't say that it's a rifle. That way you could stick a pistol tube on it, a brace, and now you have a shorter thing that you can run around the house with, if that's what you're using. Is it for job training / home defense? Okay, now we have a slightly more complicated problem. Not really, because that usually means like a standard length AR or a standard carbine length AR, where it's like about 14.5-inch barrel and that kind of stuff. Or depending on what your individual job is, it could be a 20-inch gun. I mean, even though it's fairly rare. So, and then the next one is like your target shooting or your precision work guns, made for more distant stuff or what have you. Maybe it's strictly a hunting rifle, that kind of deal. There's a bajillion different calibers that are out, so this is another category that kind of falls into place with that. And then, kind of as far as the job training thing, it's a little more complicated, because we could also be talking about, like a patrol rifle or something like that. So let's go ahead. We got to think about that first before we start thinking about all the other stuff. And I'll try and make this as relatable as possible, depending on who's talking about what or who has a particular way that they live their life or what have you. So, first things first, pretty much in my personal opinion anyway, the lifeblood of the performance of an AR is in its upper receiver. And when we're talking about individual self-defense or when it comes to job training, we want it to be close to either a department standard or a military standard or even self-defense, right? As far as home defense and stuff, we really do want to consider the barrel that we're shoving in the thing. My personal opinion on the matter is that if you pick up a solid quality barrel, basically unless you do lots and lots and lots and lots of training and practice and stuff like that, generally speaking, that barrel's going to outperform you. And that's good, because we own every round that we fire, right? And if we send stuff astray based on the quality of parts and not the quality of the individual, which I know there's a big disparity between the two, you have to be properly trained, and you have to know how to use this stuff. But if your equipment, meaning if your barrel is crap, you can have a lot of different problems. One is in the accuracy department, another one's in the stability department, right? So I'm gonna go through the list of things that a lot of people look at and that I personally look at, and we'll go through my personal opinions on that as we go, right? So we have several different barrel coatings as far as like the inside, right? We have the chrome lining, that's the standard. You have the Melonite and Nitride. These are like the big ones that are in a lot of different barrels. And there's a lot of different claims. There's a lot of people that talk about different stuff. Generally speaking, the criticism on chrome lining, which is the military standard, is that it's hard to apply consistently, and then you have accuracy issues and that kind of thing. And the Melonite and Nitride both kind of boast a greater accuracy yield, because it it can be more consistently applied. Now, with modern manufacturing techniques for all three, I'm going to be real with you, based on what I've seen, based on what I've used in the past, that kind of thing, the performance difference, while the nitride and Melonite coatings, from what I've seen, is generally a touch better, it's not that big a deal, right? We're talking, maybe a half-inch greater or tighter at 100 yards. And as far as practical accuracy is concerned, that doesn't really affect you at 7 yards and inside of that, right? So they perform very similarly. And again, with modern application process of all three of these, the inconsistency complaint of chrome lining is pretty much a moot point. So what they really do, though, is they protect the inside of your barrel, which is constructed out of steel. It protects it a lot from outside elements, rusting and that kind of stuff. So I don't want a barrel that doesn't have any of these, like a non-lined barrel, just a straight steel barrel. I personally don't want to not have those. So regardless to what it is that you pick, have one of those, right? Now, there's different barrel construction types or different types of steel that are put out. And this is, depending on who you are, this means a lot or very little, right? You have 4140, 4150 types of steel as far as barrel construction is concerned. What the 40 and the 50 really signify is how much carbon is more or less applied to the barrel construction, right, or within it. So the 4150, what this really means is with 4150 barrels, they tend to be tougher all around. And the military standard for the 4150, the military standard happens to be 4150. However, 4150 barrels are not all equal, right? Because as far as the military standard is concerned, it requires, I'm just trying to keep track of my notes, additional carbon or vanadium additives within the barrel building process, right? And all that really leads to is it's to try and keep this very simple, it's more stout, it has additional barrel life as far as number of rounds fired, that kind of thing. What this really means to you, especially if you go out and practice, is 4150, especially military specific or mil spec, or Jesus Christ, military standard 4150 is concerned, is that what it really yields to is it lasts a little bit longer, which is better for those who go out and train and practice all the time, right? So it really does help. Now, we have two different types of manufacturing processes as well that are generally out. And again, I can't get into the individual specifics of every little thing because this video will take hours. But generally speaking, you see like cold hammer forged barrels and you see like button rifled barrels and all of that. The trade-off that I've seen between the two, and I get questions on which one to use all the time, generally speaking, the cold hammer forged barrels tend to last a little bit longer, right? And we're talking, 5,000 to 8,000 rounds more than a button rifled barrel. But by a slight margin, the button rifled barrels tend to be a little bit more accurate, right? So, and again, with modern manufacturing processes, how accurate these two are as far as the difference between the two is very, very small. Like, the difference between the two is very small. So my personal preference is cold hammer forged all day. 4150 mil standard cold hammer forged. It's me personally, that's what I want to use. Because I shoot a lot, I train a lot, and when I go out and teach class and all that stuff, I do a lot of demos. So my guns tend to go through, quite a few rounds. In addition to the fact that students use my stuff all the time. Either something broke in their gun or there's an irons only portion and they don't have backup irons on their gun. I'll go ahead and snatch up one of them and throw it in his direction so that he can go ahead and use that. So my guns tend to be used quite a bit. So I tend to go for the tougher materials. Now, the stainless steel question is going to come up, and the general rule of thumb, in all honesty, for steel is that if I'm building a purpose-built precision gun, or if I want to shoot farther away with it, I tend to need a more accurate or a more consistent barrel. And this is only if the rifle that I'm building is specific to more like distance work, right? And realistically speaking, as far as just like regular rifleman distances, a 14.5-inch barrel can hit stuff at 600 yards just fine. Like you can stay definitely inside the shoulders at 600 yards, but if we're trying to hit smaller things farther away, like dome-sized target at 600, okay, let's bust out the stainless steel barrels and go to work with them. Now, generally speaking, you see 3 different sets of numbers, and yes, I know that there's more, but generally speaking, you see 410, 416, and 416 are stainless steel, right? 410 tends to be the most durable of the bunch. It's consistently accurate, but it tends to have a longer barrel life from what I've personally seen, right? 416 sort of in the middle of the road. And as far as 416R is concerned, that is the most accurate barrel that you're going to get, regardless of caliber that you pick and all that. And these are the dudes that decide to go with semi-auto 6.5 Creedmoor guns and all that stuff that are shooting like PRS matches, right? And they'll bust out the 416R for the most accuracy yield possible. Now, the drawback to all stainless steel across the board is that it tends to have a shorter barrel life than something like a cold hammer forged barrel, right? And with 416R, it is the most affected by that, meaning it has the shortest barrel life. So, for instance, if you're using it in a match rifle, you'll burn through a few barrels just in your practice before those real big matches, right? If you're out there practicing a lot. But at the same time, those ballistic advantage barrels that are 416R yield amazing results, and dudes that win use barrels like that all the time. So what we're looking at as far as degradation here is that if it's a really finely tuned barrel from a reputable manufacturer, like Ballistic Advantage, for instance, right? You're looking at something like a sub-minute rifle, sometimes half-minute rifle, and this depends on your ammunition and stuff too, obviously. But the barrel itself is very important in that, inside of its first 2,500 rounds, it is a sub-minute gun. Well within sub-minute gun, sometimes half-minute. Or less, depending. I mean, sometimes that tuned hand-loaded ammo with a barrel like that yields extremely accurate results, like 1/3. But outside of those 2,500-ish rounds, and yes, the manufacturing of these barrels has yielded slightly more durable barrels, but the principle is the same. 2,500 to 3,000 rounds, you start losing that absolute tack driving Nat's ass precision that you're looking for. And usually around 5,000-ish rounds, it defeats the purpose, because now our accuracy threshold is dropped to lower than that of a really, really good quality cold hammer forged barrel. So a lot of times the PRS guys will go with a really good quality barrel like this, and they'll be like, okay, service life 3,000 rounds, because the purpose of it being as accurate as it is kind of lost after those. So again, if you're getting into like the match stuff, that's really important. If we're talking about self-defense, hunting, that kind of thing, I would personally just go with a cold hammer forged barrel, because it yields serviceable accuracy, minute and a half, depending on the ammunition that you use, and it'll do that for a long time, right? Like, we start to see accuracy degradation around 12,000 rounds, okay? Stuff like that. And then the thing finally starts to keyhole after, depending on volume, and it may be different for you, but as far as for me, I do a lot of more high volume, higher speed stuff. As far as cold hammer forged AR barrels are concerned, I'm losing them between 2025. So, you're going to have to make a determination on what you want based on your individual purpose. So there's that, right? Now, here is the thing, okay? We're going to get into gas systems very, very, very lightly here because I have a gas system and barrel twist rate video that I'll leave in a link in the description below. But generally speaking, we're looking at something like the carbine length, mid-length, and rifle length gas system for an AR. From what I've personally experienced, assuming that the rifle is properly lubed up and that kind of deal, the carbine length gas systems tend to be a little more reliable in the moment sense, because if there's a bunch of crud in the gun, it'll push that stuff out. But over time, it wears out parts faster, right? I'm changing out things, bolts and that kind of deal, quite a bit faster than something like a mid-length gun, which is a pretty good in the middle of the road kind of deal, to where it's not as harsh on the components, still super reliable. You're able to keep a 14.5-inch barrel with a smoother impulse on the reciprocating parts, that kind of deal. And then the rifle length gas systems, which shoot the smoothest, right? And they're the least harsh on the components, which is great. They also deal much better as far as heat is concerned. As far like my M16A4 clone that is over here, right? Like it's really, really hard to make this thing super hot. With a carbine length gun, it's easier, and with a mid-length gun, it's again in the middle of the road. So again, you have to make the determination based off of what you want. And then you have the standard twist rates, which is 1 in 7, 1 in 9, and 1 in 8. The 1 in 8 tends to be like a 223 wild kind of deal. Understand this. Generally speaking, your 1 in 7 twist rate is the most common. The 1 in 9 twist rate is just not as common anymore because of the gravitation towards heavier bullets for defense use and for more distance use and hunting ammunition and stuff like that. So the 1 in 9 is beginning to go the way of the Dodo or the budget companies, right? So if you see a 1 in 9 twist barrel, I would really pay attention to where that upper or barrel came from, right? And we'll get into reputable people later on here. But there's not much more to talk to on that, because the details of which can really easily be gone through if you just go to the link in the description below. I go into much more detail on these barrel lengths and gas systems, twist rates, that kind of thing. So for those who have the barrel length questions, we can go over there too. It kind of runs together in its own little video. So here's the thing too. I get a lot of questions on ammunition to use for training, defense, that kind of thing. So the first thing I'm going to touch on is what you're going to shoot the vast majority of, if not all of, through your guns. Because let's be real here, the self-defense stuff with a rifle in a house is very, very, very rare, right? So the vast majority, if not all, of the ammunition that you send through your gun is going to be this, right? Now, realistically speaking, this is like cheapo depot stuff. The more you can get, the more you can practice, that kind of thing. Of course, you have like your XM 193 55 grain stuff. You have Wolf Gold, which is basically the same thing. PMC does a lot of good stuff, and yes, I know there was a video in which a PMC round essentially blew apart a gun that I was working with, but as far as major manufacturers are concerned, I've seen about all of them do it, except the Russian Steelcase stuff and Wolf Gold so far, right? So, ammunition factories make mistakes too. I'll still recommend PMC. And like American Eagle, and you have people like, there's a million different manufacturers out there. Like Freedom does a lot of stuff too. So, the one thing I can really say, and regular Wolf Steelcase. The one thing I can definitely say is, in all honesty, get the cheapest stuff that you can get and shoot the most that you can. Now, with Wolf steel case and Tula steel case, I tend to not like Tula, and that's only because it's an inconsistent performer as far as just like accuracy. Every once in a while I get cycling issues, that kind of thing, and it is even more low powered than Wolf, so I tend to stick with Wolf as far as the steel case stuff in my guns. For those who have questions on just the whether or not it wears more as far as the gun is concerned, what to do about the stuck cases and things like that, I made a dedicated video to that as well, where we dispel a lot of myths, and it's far more usable. A lot of people have just told me, they're on the fence, they're completely against Wolf, and then they watch that video and their minds were completely changed, and it's all they run now. So go ahead to the link in the description below, also for the steel cased ammunition video that I did a while back, and we'll go from there. Now, as far as self-defense, there's a lot of different manufacturers out there. To me, like the big two as far as self-defense and hunting ammunition, that comes from like Corbon and Hornady, right? The rifle ammunition coming out of these two is nasty, right? It's really, really good stuff. And Hornady makes probably some of the best hunting ammunition I've ever seen as far as consistency of performance, not just in the accuracy department, but on the animal that you're trying to take or whatever. So I like both of those two. As far as target shooting or distance shooting in the 223 5.56 realm, and that's where I'm going to stay here. A Mark 262 pattern 77 grain round is to me the best bet, and a really good source for that is Black Hills. If you're building your own Mark 262, just remember to stay within spec and use Sierra Match King bullets, and you really can't go wrong. Okay, so there's that. Oh, and be consistent with your brass, right? As far as just consistency on delivery and that kind of stuff, I like Leupold brass the best for the match grade stuff. So now here's another big question here. Should I build or should I buy? Well, really, that's up to you. If you're like I was and am about certain things still, a lot of guys, especially if you're getting into this and you're new at it, right? A lot of times guys are not confident with their ability to assemble the parts. And I completely understand that, man. All it really is a confidence and experience thing. And some guys just don't trust themselves to put together a rifle and have it function, right? So here is a fairly long list of companies that build competent firearms that are complete, that will sell them to you, and you can pretty much just pick the thing up and walk away with it without hardly any issues at all. And the few lemons that there are, these companies handle their customer service very, 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 very good. So these are all companies that I've either used personally, did reviews on, right, which also personally used, or witnessed a lot in classes that I've either taken or taught, right? So here we go. And this is in no real particular order. They do very well all on their own, right? So you have Bravo Company Manufacturing, or BCM, Sons of Liberty Gunworks, FN or Fabrique Nationale, Spikes Tactical, Daniel Defense, Smith & Wesson. Their MP15 line is pretty good. Colt, Palmetto State Armory, their premium line. I have no data on their Freedom line. Like, I haven't seen them used before, and I haven't personally used them. This is a PSA premium line 20-inch gun, and it's been running like a champion. It's been shot a lot, either by students or myself, and it just keeps on rolling. I've had to change a set of gas rings out of it, and that's it. I don't know why the gas rings went down, personally, so I don't really know. But since that first time that I had to change out gas rings, and this was at Pat McNamara course that I took, I've had no other issues from it at all. What else? Knight's Armament. Knight's Armament, like the SR-15 and pretty much all their products except the 110. I don't know what the issue is with the 110. But as far as a 223 5.56 gun, The SR15 is amazing. Just be wary of this if you're building anything. If you attach a lower to a Knight's complete upper, you're fine. But if you start changing out upper receiver components, that's really a no-no, because there's a lot of proprietary parts in that upper, like the barrel extension, the bolt, the cam pin, stuff like that. So if you throw like a Daniel Defense bolt in a Knight's Armament gun, that'll work in the moment, but if you just keep on using it like that, you're going to wreck things. So pay attention to that. They have a lot of proprietary parts in their uppers. However, a Knight's Armament complete rifle, from my personal use and all that, like I reviewed one a while back. For my personal use, Knight's Armament guns are some of the nicest ARs I've ever used in my entire life. Ross Weapons of Military Design, or RWMD, I did a review on one of those. It has a 416R stainless barrel in it too, and I killed that barrel right around 10,000 rounds. I still have to replace that barrel, but that rifle was awesome from start to when I killed the barrel, right? So, you know, it's also fairly expensive though. So it's a premium line gun. I would pay attention to what you are using it for, but it is an excellent rifle in and of itself. Now, stag arms. I might have lit some torches, and a couple of people may have grabbed their pitchforks. From what I've personally seen, stag arms guns do fine, right? However, I am also aware of some complaints that other people have as far as their manufacturing issues. The only thing that I can really say is this is sort of a roll of the dice, right? Because I have this personal experience, but there's other people saying different, right? But I haven't personally seen it. So if you're going to pick up something from Stag Arms, I would say just premium kit everything. Make sure that you have their MPI tested. I think it's like a plus package or something like that. On their moving parts, just make sure that that is on their upper echelon of stuff before you just kind of go forward with it, right? Who else? Noveski. Expensive guns, but they run, I've never seen one not run. Lewis Machine Tool. Great stuff. H&K, very expensive, but their MR556 does run. Midwest Industries makes great stuff. Barrett makes a great piston-driven rifle, as well as the HK. LWRC, really good DI and piston guns. Primary Weapon Systems, or PWS. Okay. Adams Arms, also great stuff. Patriot Ordnance Factory, or POF. You know, most of us have seen the Iraq veteran 8888 meltdown, where he took that piston-driven gun, put it in a full auto test, and burned through a bajillion rounds of stuff of Wolf in full auto. So, you know, a lot of people are really sold on the quality of that system in and of itself, and having seen a few of them come through classes or classes that I've taught before, you know, they run fine. LaRue makes great complete guns, and they have the stealth uppers and all that stuff. They make excellent equipment. So all of these companies are, and I know I've missed a lot that you guys want to ask me about, but at the same time, if I haven't mentioned it, chances are I haven't seen it before or simply forgot about it, right? All of these bought straight from them, from the factory and all that stuff. They make good guns, right? Now, I know that you guys are going to ask about like the MMP, like the MMP Sport 2 or something like that. Now, here's the thing about these slick-sided guns without E-ports and brass deflectors. Like, they're as bare bones as possible, right? If it comes from a reputable manufacturer, like from one of the ones I've listed, I've seen a few of these guns come out to classes, and I've seen them cycle. You know, they run fine. However, there are a couple of things to note. Number one is that while they'll work, you'll start getting annoyed at a couple of things. And the first thing that a lot of people will start to get annoyed at, especially if they take like self-defense classes and stuff, is the lack of that brass deflector. That thing is going to hit you straight in the teeth. Okay, especially if you're using like wolf ammo or whatever, right? You know, those cases are going straight in the teeth, and that's going to be a little irritating. You'll miss that brass deflector now that it's gone the second you switch over to southpaw, right? Or if you're a southpaw in general, I would say to just kind of, you know, not use those, mostly because of that issue, right? You'll never not have an annoying day. However, I can't really recommend against the Sport 2 in and of itself, because I've seen several of them now, and they work. They work just fine, you know. So, you know, I haven't reviewed one though. So again, take that opinion with a grain of salt, right? Now, building an AR. Building an AR can seem in and of itself like a rather immense challenge to a lot of folks, because there is just all this stuff and all these marketing teams trying to get your credit card information, and a lot of them are garbage, right? A lot of them are straight up garbage. So what I'm going to do here is, unlike the AK video where there's just fewer things to go through, as far as just a variety, especially in the United States, I'm going to avoid the companies that I hate, mostly because if I mix that with the companies that I like, this is going to go on forever, right? So, you know, while we're building an AR, the first thing that we're going to have to worry about, because this requires a background check, right, is the lower. Now, here's the thing. Provided that the lower receiver itself is made out of quality stuff, okay, and, well, let me back up. Provided that you don't have any fitting issues, and that you don't have, and that stuff is properly tightened up, all of that, unless you're trying to build a precision setup, a lower is a lower is a lower. And to me personally, if you're trying to build a precision setup, if you're trying to build that tack drive-in rifle, you might as well get a complete rifle rather than trying to build one up yourself, because a lot of times you may have a stacking tolerances issue. And what I've seen several times in the past is where, like, this dude will drop $5,000, and on paper this rifle is fucking amazing, right? And then he takes it out, and he's really pissed off that this $5,000 rifle is shooting a minute and a half. And generally speaking, I make fun of the software, not the hardware at that point. But at in this individual instance, I know that dude's a shooter, right? So you may run into a stacking tolerances issue to where that lower doesn't fit that perfect, just perfect enough to that upper receiver, or that barrel doesn't fit perfect enough, but it's within a certain tolerance spec from left to right on how things individually fit together, right? So the sum of its parts is mediocrity stuff, right? Or if you're going to build it, I would say have a competent PRS rifle guy put your shit together, right? He'll put you in the correct direction as far as lower components, upper components, all of that. So there's that. Now, as far as a quality lower is concerned, we're going to want to make sure that our castle nut on our tube is tight. We're going to want to make sure that this guy moves freely, okay? Personally, I just like captured pins. There are some lowers that don't have captured pins, and fuck that. I like to retard-proof my stuff. Make sure that your buttons and your switches aren't ridiculous. Make sure that you know, it's not super duper tight, but it'll snick on and off, and it doesn't just kind of float in place. Make sure that as far as your buffer tube is concerned, just get a mil-spec one. If you grab a commercial buffer tube, you're going to run into compatibility issues with most of the market, right? Because as far as most of the market is concerned, most of the market revolves their stocks around mil-spec. So if you run up with a commercial stock or a commercial tube on a military stock, or vice versa, we're gonna start running into compatibility issues. So just get a military tube. Okay. Now, whether or not you like a 4 or position tube, or 4 or a 6 position tube, really that's on you. But that's something that I really want to note about these, as well as the rifle length tubes as well. Make sure that we stay in mil spec as far as that's concerned, because most of the market or aftermarket market is gauged for that, right? And then from there, realistically speaking, just make sure that you don't have any magazine fitting issues, to where you do want a little bit of looseness. This is supposed to wiggle around a little bit, right? It's supposed to wiggle around a little bit. So if you insert a magazine and it doesn't move it at all, that lower's too tight. If you insert that magazine, yank really hard, and the magazine comes out, it's obviously too loose, move on to a different lower, right? And I mean, I've seen the gamut before. You know, I've seen really high quality lowers, or lowers that are marked with really high quality brand names. And I also have well over 100,000 rounds of like various different uppers and stuff on a DPMS lower from like my first AR ever, which, you know, all the way put together is a giant piece of shit. But the lower itself is serviceable, right? So if we're building just a self-defense rifle, we're not worried about stacking those rounds on top of each other at 300 and 400 yards. What we're looking at is a serviceable carbine that will run practical accuracy, and we're not going to have any operating issues out of. So keep those things in mind. But generally speaking, if you select the lower, even if it's generally speaking from a budget manufacturer, it's probably going to be good to go, right? Like Anderson lowers, Aereo, that kind of stuff. Pretty much whoever it comes from, it'll be fine. Now, it would be suspect to me if the lower was like $12, but the market value generally on a lower that has a right to exist is usually somewhere around, it was like $150 during panic buys and stuff, but we're looking at like $50, $70 now, right? So that's how that works. Oh, things to avoid: polymer and carbon fiber upper and lower receivers. Okay, and here's why those suck. On polymer and carbon fiber lower receivers, this part right here is going to crack and it's going to blast some shit apart, right? Because the lower itself is a low stress receiver, but there is a fairly decent amount of stress right here. You can also see, just based on how much metal is there, this is the weak point. Okay, because we have a lot of torque going to the rear and all of that stuff. So avoid polymer and carbon fiber. Just Google foo it, man. You'll see endless pictures of those things snapping right at that spot over and over and over and over again. Don't do it. I know it's light. I know it's cheap. Don't do it. Okay. Same thing with the same materials in an upper receiver. And the reason being is that your barrel extension, okay, your barrel extension ends right here, okay? Now, you have, as far as the barrel extension is concerned, that's a steel part because it's part of your barrel, which is also a steel part. But if your receiver is made out of polymer or carbon fiber, especially in a direct impingement gun, actually really in a piston gun too, because there's mountains of torque up here. But as far as the receiver is concerned, you have a heavy thing pulling on the front end, right? That goes through wild temperature changes depending on how much you shoot it. And what's going to happen is that it's going to start to stress this portion of the receiver, which your barrel extension screws into, or rather your barrel nut tightens down your barrel extension to, right? So you have a lot of torque from the barrel nut tightening down that barrel extension, and you have the added stress of weight out front as well as wild temperature changes. So what's going to happen over time? It's going to start drooping, and then you're going to blast a gun apart. Don't do it, okay? Save yourself some issues and don't do it. Now, here's the thing, okay? Here's what I'm going to get into next, right? We're going to stay in the lower receiver end, and we're going to start talking about buffers, right? Now, here is a list of just a few options of buffers that are currently out. Okay, you have the regular carbine buffer, which is 3 ounces. the heavy or H marked buffer, which is 3.8 ounces. You have the H2, which is 4.7 ounces. The H3, which is 5 ounces. It's got like 3 tungsten weights inside the buffer. And you have the HSS, which is 6.5 ounces. The XH, which is 8.5 ounces. And your standard rifle length buffer, which is what, 5 ounces? What does all this weight mean? Why does it rattle when you shake it? That kind of deal, right? Well, the reason why it rattles around when you shake it is there are weights floating in that buffer, right? And as far as your parts are concerned, what it's designed to do is that as your parts cycle to the rear, okay, that momentum eventually stops and it starts to cycle itself forward because of the recoil spring. Well, what happens is that these weights, because there's some space in there, are shoved all the way to the rear. Now, as all that moves forward and as the bolt locks up in the battery, the buffer is suddenly halted in position, right? It ends, obviously, right here. Now, when that buffer is halted in position, those buffer weights slam forward and stay there. What it keeps from happening is it keeps your bolt and carrier from bouncing out of battery due to inertia, right? And this was more of a thing that was brought about because of the carbine length gas systems and the fact that they cycle at a faster rate than like a rifle length system, right? Now, what does this mean though? And what buffer should I use? Now, generally speaking, to essentially ensure a reliable rifle and in full auto, okay, a standard H buffer will work just fine. That's what it was made for. And in most carbine length, well, actually in most upper receivers in general, their barrel extensions have M4 feed ramps, which assist also in cycling the action properly, getting rounds chambered, locked up, and fired without cycling issues under full auto. Now, under semi-auto, that means a great deal less. However, as you start to gunk up the gun and shoot it a whole lot, it does start to mean something because it means that everything's locking up properly. Now, if you're using a standard carbine length gun or even a mid-length gun, there may be some questions as far as what buffer do I use and all that stuff, right? Generally speaking, as far as a collapsible carbine tube, right, like one of these, what I generally end up using is a standard H buffer, maybe an H2. And the difference between the two, really, is you'll feel a very, very slight difference in impulse, what kind of thump hits you in the shoulder. That's it, really. The H2, depending on your gas system and muzzle device, will cycle a little bit smoother, right? But it helps most with a carbine length gas system, right? With a mid-length gas system, you don't really feel it. With a standard H buffer, again, in a mid-length system, you don't even really feel it. But you'll notice that with a standard H buffer in a carbine length system, you'll notice it in the impulse a little bit more, mostly because it's being flung back there a little bit faster. It's lighter, so you'll feel it thump at you a little bit harder. That's about it, really. So just stay in that realm. Like there's not much more than you can really add to it, unless you have a crazy short barrel on a carbine or pistol length gas system, which pistol length gas systems I don't recommend anyway. Generally speaking, they don't work very well. I know that there's guys that have made it happen, for sure. And for those that do, for those that have produced working pistol length gas systems, you want heavier buffers for those, just to slow down the cyclic rate just a little bit and keep you from having cycling issues. But other than that, as far as a carbine length gas system or a mid-length gas system, H2, real simple, right? So, and for the rifle length tubes, right, a standard rifle buffer is just fine, right? Now, whether or not you get now here's a question I do get on rifle length gas systems, on like a 20-inch barreled gun. I decided to put a carbine length tube on it because that length of pull is super awkward for me, and I wanted a collapsible stock. Do I get like a crazy different buffer or anything like that? No. The answer is no. Standard H works just fine. Just don't go too heavy. because if you start going too heavy, the parts are not cycling as fast because of the rifle length gas system. A standard H buffer will do you just fine in that regard. So, what type of buffer that you use really is dictated by the type of tube that you use. If you use a carbine or collapsible tube, you're using a carbine buffer, the shorter one, right? The H or the H2. If you're using a rifle length tube, you're using a rifle buffer, and the standard one, again, works just fine. Now, when it comes to the types of recoil springs that you should have in it and stuff like that, generally speaking, again, that comes down to the buffer tube that you're using, generally, right? If you have a buffer tube that is carbine, get a carbine length spring in it. If you have a buffer tube that's rifle length, get a rifle length spring in it. Now, there are a couple of different aftermarket options. Some are pretty damn good, right? And I'll just go ahead and recommend them just because I've used a few of these in the past, right? For instance, a good option is, there's two of them from JP Enterprises, right? JP Enterprises makes their, I better make sure to read this right or people are going to lose their minds, the chrome silicon spring, right? The chrome silicon spring from JP Enterprises in all my guns. It's rated for a bajillion friggin' cycles, and it's very, very consistent. It's very flat. You don't feel a thudding impulse or anything like that, like you do from a lot of different buffer springs, a lot of different types of buffer springs. I've used flat wire springs before. They're pretty good. JP Enterprises also makes a a buffer and recoil spring combo. It's called the silent captured spring. That's a whole unit that goes in, and it's adjustable, and it's really quiet, really smooth, and you can tune it for what it is that you're using. Just go on their website and look at directions for certain types of loads or gas systems or whatever that you want or that you're thinking about using it for. The only con to that really is that it's expensive, right? It's like $100+ for it. So, there's that. For my rifle length guys, Viltor makes a really good, I think it's like an A5 rifle length buffer spring or whatever. It's meant for the 20-inch guns, and that thing is, it makes a smooth gun more so. So, go figure on that whole mess. But yeah, I mean, really, that's all I can really say about, the buffer springs and buffers and all that is, yeah, there are a bajillion options, but it's simplified a little bit more if you listen to the context of what it is that I'm saying, right? So now let's move on to your upper receiver components. Look, this is pretty simple, right? Don't skimp on the upper receiver components. Yes, complete uppers from all the companies that I've mentioned previously are fairly expensive, right? But you have to understand that is a high stress component. Like the upper receiver takes the vast majority of the movement, it takes the lockup, it takes almost all the heat. You have to have quality stuff in there if you're expecting your gun to run. And most of the time when people start running into working gun issues or snap bolts or whatever, it's because they simply did not spend or look for quality parts, right? So a couple of good places to look for, complete uppers or upper components and stuff like that. I'm not sure if Daniel Defense still does its build your upper portion of their website, but if that's up, that's great because you can just assemble that upper receiver and put it on whatever lower that you put it on, right? With Bravo Company Manufacturing, those guys are amazing because there are a bajillion different options. They don't put bullshit on their website from what I've seen in the past, and you can feel fairly safe about any moving components, barrels, gas tubes, all of that. You can feel pretty safe, especially in like the muzzle device, or charging handle department as well. You know, you can feel pretty safe shopping around on there. And yeah, it's a little more expensive than a lot of budget companies, but there's kind of a reason for that. You know, if you make a quality product, you get to name a price for it. And in all honesty, to me, that's a place where I'm more strict on the vast majority of my shopping. Is that's the place where I just kind of click things, right? Because and deal with the bill, because that's where you make or break your rifle, really, for the most part. So don't skimp on that, please. Don't skimp on that. Go to, like, the suggestions I made for the complete rifles. I would say go to their websites and pick up an upper from them, or upper components, depending on what it is that you want to do. You know, and this goes with a lot of rail sections too. You'd be amazed how many, quote, free float rails will just come loose. You know, and over time, yeah, some of them do if you're not watching where screws are embedded and stuff. But man, like I said, just go get a quality one, and just, that's the end of it, really. If you get a quality one, and if you follow the directions, dudes, I know we don't read directions ever, but sometimes the slightest difference in that particular rail in the directions will lead to whether or not it works right. So read the directions properly, assemble the parts, all of that. So there's that. So pretty simple, you know. As far as bolts and carriers and AR-15 profile or M16 profile, the market has shifted a lot towards quality builders are putting in M16 profile bolts and carriers, right? In a semi-auto rifle, it does not really matter if you have a M16 profile or an AR-15 profile bolt carrier in your gun. It really doesn't. What matters is the construction of the steel, whether or not it was MPI tested, all of that stuff. Again, I would say just don't skimp. Go for the more premium stuff, because these are the highest stress components in the gun, because that really dictates whether or not your gun operates correctly. Okay, so again, don't skimp. Go to the reputable sources and all of that, and you know, don't skimp on stuff like extraction springs, whether or not you want an O-ring in there, that kind of deal. Another good place that you can just, you know, click on stuff that works is, you know, you go to Sons of Liberty Gunworks, and pretty much anything that you click on is good to go, right? So there you go on that. Now, there are a few odds and ends that a lot of people ask me about too. So we'll get into them. The list of charging handles that I personally use is pretty short, right? Now, the most widely available are the first two, and my most favorite being the Radian Raptor charging handle. It's an ambi charging handle. I personally prefer it. I put it in as many guns as I can, and the reason being is that it's rounded enough to not snag on things. It doesn't have the Badger problem, to where those charging handles would have roll pins coming loose, right? And these things right here, they're rounded enough to where they don't snag on stuff, but they're hooked and serrated just enough to where if you snatch onto the thing, even with gloves, even if your hands are cold, whatever, it'll run just fine. Also, they're ambidextrous, which is neat. So that personally works for me. The next one is from BCM. Now, I don't personally prefer the BCM charging handle, but it definitely works. Okay, and the only reason why I don't prefer it is just personal preference. Okay, they're absolutely serviceable. The way that the latch pivots on the charging handle really does help even out the wear a lot, and their ambi version is pretty good. So not much more to say on that. And there's another one that I have that I've been using for quite a long time, and it's older tech for sure. But this is the tack latch. I'm not even sure if these are available anymore. But you can see that it is a huge latch for the southpaw side, and what's kind of neat is that the bar that runs underneath here and reinforces the GI length right-handed side is just enough to where it's just that little bit more meat that you can grab onto that keeps you from screwing things up. Now, or slipping off of it or whatever. And when they were making them, they made right-handed versions as well. So if you can still find them, I would pick them up. I wouldn't hesitate to at all. The only thing that I could say is that mine is so used, and the latch is so big, and there's just a lot of weight in there that just over time I started to notice a little bit of that. Does that cause any problems? No, it doesn't. But just be aware, that's all. So those are charging handles that I personally prefer and that I personally like advocate for people to use. Now, as far as building an AR is concerned, you're in the distinct advantage of not having to change out stock furniture. So we can go with a large list of manufacturers that make really good furniture, right? So the one that you can't do a list without is Magpul, MFT, the same guys that make the minimalist stock, right? Midwest Industries makes a lot of really good stuff. Troy makes a lot of really good stuff. I understand why a lot of you may not want to pick up Troy, but bottom line, their stuff works. Daniel Defense makes really good furniture. There's polarizing opinions on it, but it's 110% serviceable, and I personally like it. B5 Systems, you may or may not have seen the stock on this guy, but yeah, there it is. Geisley makes excellent rails. They sit super tight to the barrel nut and stuff. They are expensive, but they work really well. Centurion, not Century, but Centurion makes really good rails and stuff too. There is some military furniture that I like, but I'll get to that later. Knight's Armament makes really good furniture. It's just expensive. Same thing for Lewis Machine and Tool, or LMT. LaRue makes really good stuff as well. And now let's talk about the military furniture that I like. Okay, you guys may have seen my mock-up for like an M16 carbine, right? Me personally, I like the fatter military handguards, mostly because there's just a little bit more to grab onto, a little more space from you and the barrel, makes things a little bit cooler. And the cool thing is that the double heat shielding in it is incredibly effective, and because of just the material that this handguard's made out of, it works really good in the cold too. Now, I just wanted to make essentially a cool looking M16 carbine type rifle. I do not like military M4 stocks. They are so fragile, it's ridiculous. And even if you served in the military and you're not in a combat job or whatever, and even if you don't really touch many of these, many of you may have probably seen this area right here, this whole area right here, in a standard M4 stock just break the fuck off, right? They're incredibly fragile. I hate them, and they get very loose very quickly. Now, on the other side of the house, though, I love A2, A1 stocks. They're fantastic. They're super stable to shoot from. The teeth in these stocks grips into whatever it is that you've got it on. Even if you have like the tiniest of purchases on your shoulder, like if you're trying to shoot high power farther away, or just the equipment that you've got on, or you're in a terrible position or whatever, the teeth in them really grip into whatever it is that you've got. It's a little irritating if you have like a wife beater only on, or a really, really light t-shirt or whatever, but it's not a big deal. And the cool thing is that with these stocks and with rifle length tubes, you're not torquing on a carbine buffer tube, because it's not on a carbine buffer, and the whole thing is screwed and then fitted into place on a standard end plate. So you can beat the ever-loving shit out of this rifle on whatever, tables, people, whatever. So I love those stocks. I love them to death. I wouldn't change anything about them, me personally. So there's that. Now, I've had a lot of questions also about backup iron sights, and there's a lot of people that push a lot of backup iron sight types that I don't like at all. And here's why. If I need my backups, I friggin' need them. Like, I need them, and one thing I don't need to have happen is I don't need to have them swept off by like gear or just me moving around or whatever, right? So what I personally require out of my backups is a locking system of some kind, right? That way, if it's up, it's not getting knocked off, none of that. So the two in that regard that I really like, and yes, they are expensive, they're like $100+ a piece for like a front and then a rear, is I absolutely love Midwest Industries. I prefer those backups. Another option there is Troy. Again, they work exceptionally well. I just personally prefer Midwest Industries mostly because it's just easier to adjust. I got the drum in there from like an A2 type thing. The rear and front sight apertures look very, very familiar. Like I don't have to deal with that diamond rear or whatever from Troy, and it's just a traditional peep sight setup, which I just personally prefer, right? A couple other sets of backup irons on there you might have seen on that gun. The front sight was a Dana Defense, and their fixed rear sights do really well also. Okay, I'm also a big, huge fan of LMT fixed irons. I really do like them, mostly because, again, the usability as far as irons are concerned. A lot of people don't put a lot of thought into whether or not they could really use those irons in all conditions. And the cool thing about the LMT sights is that they have the elevation drum on them, so if I have to dedicate any real time to them, I might as well be able to use them at whatever distance I want to use them at, that kind of thing. Also, they mount in an exceptionally secure way, so there's that opinion there. What else? So now we're getting into more accessories, stuff to put on the gun once you get out of the iron sight world, right? Okay, I'm going to touch very briefly on optics, mostly because there's a million different people that make a million different optics, and I'm a little sheltered as far as a lot of different optics are concerned, mostly because I've, for the most part, just stuck to what I like, and I try not to experiment with my money on sighting systems, because to me, whether or not a shot lands is extremely important in every single regard of the word. So here's the stuff that I've used in the past that works very well. Aim point for sure. Okay, T1, H1, T2, Pro, Comp M2, Comp M4, awesome optics all the way around, fucking bomb proof. Okay, ridiculous battery life. You have far less of you have far less of turrets freezing from super cold weather. You have less blooming or sunbursting. It takes a lot to get them there, like many thousands of rounds. And really good defense of the electronic components from heat and cold and shock, right? So there's not much more to say. Aim point is very much up there. The cheaper ones that I personally like, that are more affordable for a lot of guys, are obviously the Pro. There's an even cheaper version of the Pro. It follows the form factor of a Comp M2, and it's far more affordable than a lot of them out there. In the $500 range, you're looking at like the H1 and a lot of T1s right now. Those are the smaller micro dots. The T2 is like your $700 optic, and the Comp M4, which is the most durable of the set, right? And how durable is it? It's durable enough to issue to regular Joes, which excel at breaking fucking everything. And it's very, very, very rare that I see Comp M4 acting up ever, right? So, there it is on that. And again, all of them across the board have absurd battery life. So, the Comp M2 is also great. It was just replaced by like the Comp M4. The only real issues that the Comp M2 tends to have is that it tends to, like, at an inside 25 meters, it tends to have a little bit of a parallax issue, which is where a lot of this co-witness stuff came from, until that was alleviated by the Comp M4, and then you notice that the co-witness stuff kind of went away, right? So there's that. Another one is Trigicon, the MROs, the RMRs. Okay, I love both. Okay, what a lot of people won't like about the RMR is it has 1 minute adjustments for elevation and windage. That's not accurate enough for a lot of guys, and I can concede that point for sure. But the MRO is turning out to be an exceptional optic that a lot of people really love, and I can certainly see why. It looks like an aimpoint T1 with cancer, just tumors all over the place, but it's an excellent optic. And as far as parallax issues, man, it's right at EOTech levels of of how precise that dot is depending on where it is in the window. And that's a good segue into EOTech. Now, there has been a lot of controversy circling EOTech as far as what they list for temperature windows and stuff like that. I'm going to tell you what, me personally, I've never been affected by those temperature windows, right? But what I have been affected by, and this is in their cheaper stuff, like the ones that take the double A's that go in the front end, is terminal bouncing issues where the thing would flicker. With that same type of optic, I've had elevation and windage issues to where stuff would get in there and turn things. But as far as the XPS 2 and 3 is concerned, none of those issues seem present because of how the battery hooks up. And EOTech brought in a lot of different companies to fix a couple of different terminal issues because the battery terminals used to kill themselves all the time. And they got to fix a lot of those issues, so, that's great. It really is. One thing I would say, though, as far as a self-defense rifle, and why I would not pick it, right, for a self-defense rifle, is that when that optic turns on, I just leave it on. And something that I really fucking hate about EOTech is that there's an auto shut-off feature because the battery life is pathetic. We're looking at 600 hours, right? So me personally, I don't want to worry about whether or not the reticle is on, and I don't want to change out batteries a million times. So you're going to have to take that into consideration if you want one. Now, the plus to it is that, my personal opinion, and there's some people that think different, and that's fine, is that the circle dot reticle is the greatest fighting rifle reticle in the history of mankind. And especially since it is a holographic reticle, you can tone down brightness and take shots at greater distances by literally shooting through the aperture because you can see. Me personally, there has never been a finer reticle in the RDS market, or red dot sight market. So, again, you're going to have to take the good with the bad and make those considerations. Now, Holosun is another one that's emerging very, very well. And this is one of those optics that, as far as a civilian is concerned, serves every single purpose that an aim point or an EOTech or a Trijicon would. And that's why a lot of people are going with them. Same thing for primary arms. I know that they have red dots too that are labeled slightly different and all that stuff. Okay, whatever. They're essentially the same optic. In all honesty, if you're not a green suit dude, if you're not a cop, I would just stick one on your gun. They're way cheaper. The battery life on them is absurd. They have no right being as good as they are. They don't. They have no right at all being as good as they are. So, I can't really say anything negative about them. So, there you go. Now, for those of you that are in the Target or SDM or I want to shoot farther department, here's some solid glass to look at, right? Trijicon again, man. The ACOGs, the variable powers, awesome optics all the way around. Night Force, pricey, just like Trijicon, more so actually, but great reputation. I've used them before. Excellent quality glass. Loophole, same thing. Okay, excellent quality glass. US Optics, right at the same quality level of Schmidt & Bender, and these are like my absolute tops. Okay, very expensive. Schmidt & Bender is even worse, but US Optics is equal in quality. I don't have to wait months and months and months and months for one to get here, and if I have issues of any kind with it, I don't have to wait months and months and months and months to get that fixed. So US Optics is the very top, right? One I forgot to mention was Steiner. They make great quality stuff, pricey just like the Night Force and Loophole stuff, and Trijicon also. And the two that are surprising is that Vortex has pretty good quality glass. It really does. And the Bushnell Elite series is pretty much doing the same thing. So, again, depending on how much coin you're willing to spend or how robust you want your glass to be. I will say this, if you're trying to make an extreme distance 6.5 Creedmoor AR, I would just say that your glass, as far as extreme distance or long distance shooting, your glass is more important than the rifle and cartridge that you're shooting. My personal opinion. So pay attention to that kind of stuff. And to just kind of wrap this up in a nice, neat little bow, we're looking at solid lights, okay, that you can mount to your gun. Surefire is absolutely on the list. It's always been on the list. They have made great quality stuff. that everybody can use very well. They are a little pricey, but if you want your assurance of quality, there it is. You know, Surefire has always made a great product. Now, Streamlight is surprising to me in that I've mounted them on most of my rifles, and they have just stood up to everything, getting dropped, getting shot a fuck ton, running on low batteries, running on lower quality batteries, running on good quality batteries, all that stuff. They run great, and the cool thing is that if you have a problem with them, just like Surefire, you send it in, they replace it. That's it. So, and here's another one, and here's one that I was not expecting was going to be on this list, and a lot of people are surprised are on this list of quality lights. I'm going to do a full review on this later, and that's the Inforce Gen 2 weapon-mounted light. The Gen 1 was incredibly fragile. The Gen 2 is not, and from what I understand, the polymer is made out of the same stuff that Glock frames are made out of. The switches snick in and out of stuff now. This one won't snick, but that's only because of its orientation. I love the switch. I love the options in whether or not you can have a momentary only or a click on, click off. I love the flooding on them. I love the design, and it's tough. It really is. It's truly tough. So if you are on the fence about that, I would say go ahead and do it. So realistically speaking, honestly, as far as building a gun is concerned, if you do your shopping, right, even if you don't skimp on the upper components, right, let's say you come out on top, right, because buying a rifle and then changing out stuff to fit you will definitely be more expensive than just building up the one that you want and then mounting stuff from the get-go, right? The only thing is that, and again, I understand if people have an aversion to, or are rather apprehensive about doing that as a first-time thing, because and I understand, man. I was in the same boat when I first did this. I didn't trust myself to build a rifle. So I hope this was very helpful. A lot of guys asked me a lot of different questions, and I tried to answer as many as I could. And I know I probably missed all kinds of shit, right? But this is a good overview, and I think this is a good forward direction to go as far as all of that's concerned, right? So I hope it was informative. I hope it was very helpful. If you have any questions, throw it in the comments box below. If you have built a rifle or made any mistakes, I want to know. If you made any mistakes on your first time purchase, I want to know too. Because here was my first one. My first AR build, or my first AR buy, was a colossal fucking failure. Okay, I got a fixed stock, carbine length, okay, heavy profile, non-chrome lined DPMS, right, with a fixed carrying handle, and I paid $1,200 for it. It was horrible. I got fucking raped on price, but I didn't know anything, and there were no really, really detailed videos on how to go about this, and what was good and what was bad, aftermarket stuff, sorting through options, all of that, because a lot of times people are concerned about length, and my opinion is, fuck that. I'll sit through an hour-long video if I know if the information's good. So there it is, right? So tell me about your first disaster of a build or buy, right? Give me some opinions. I want to see them in the comments, because a lot of times a lot of good information gets passed that way. Now, if you want to learn how to use your AR, if you want to use your self-defense rifle or pistol or whatever, we have classes posted for sure on the website. The next nearest one that isn't sold out is in the middle of April, and that's a performance pistol class. So, come out and do what you can on that. If you want to support us on Patreon, you absolutely can. And if you don't want to pay full price for a class, you can sign up for $35 a month. And as long as you're signed up to that program, you can take as many classes with us as you want. And that's the end of that, right? And that system was specifically designed to be abused. So by all means, abuse it. We have a lot of repeat students that would not have had the ability to come out and train as much if they didn't have a program like that. And it's something that I wanted since I started doing this. So there you go. Now, if you want to join the discussion on Facebook or ask any questions there, link in the description below for that as well. And really, that's it, guys. I hope this was a helpful video. And remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.